When we think about noble women in the late medieval and Tudor world, the image that usually comes to mind is one of duty. Dynastic marriages, carefully arranged, alliances brokered, women serving as pawns in the political chess game. But every so often, a woman tossed that script into the fire and married scandalously, sometimes for love, sometimes for passion, and sometimes for reasons that no one at court could quite forgive. Today, we are going to look at a few of those cases where women bucked convention, caused gossip, and in some cases changed history entirely. So grab your coffee or your water. Look at this fun new knockoff Stanley I got at Michael's the other day. It's like Harry Potter themed, but they didn't call it Harry Potter. They call it like Wizard Kid or something. It was weird. But anyway, I'm very happy with it. Okay, so grab your water or your coffee and get cozy because we are going to discuss some of the most scandalous marriages in the Tudor world. Hey friend, welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather, and I've been podcasting on Tudor England with my show since 2009, which makes me the original Tudor history podcaster. As always, I am delighted that you are here with me today to talk about scandalous marriages. Let's get started with the beginning of the Tudor dynasty itself. Actually, going back even further, I guess you could say that the Tudors, their origin story, they were born out of one of the most scandalous marriages in English history, that of John of Gaunt and Katherine Swynford, which led to the Beaufort line, Margaret Beaufort. That is a different story, and it's further back than I want to go in this video. So we are going to start with Katherine of Valois and Owen Tudor. We'll start at the very beginning of the Tudor story, because without a scandalous marriage, the dynasty itself might never have existed. Katherine of Valois was, of course, the French princess who married Henry V in 1420, sealing the Treaty of Troyes, and for a brief moment uniting England and France. But Henry died suddenly in 1422, leaving Katherine a widow at just 20 years old. He also left behind an infant son, the future Henry VI. Now, as Dowager Queen, Katherine was subject to very strict rules. Parliament decreed that she could not marry again without the king's approval, and since her son was only a child, that effectively meant that the royal council controlled her fate. In theory, this was about protecting the crown from foreign influence, but in practice, it kept her isolated and politically powerless. And yet, sometime in the 1430s, Katherine fell in love with Owen Tudor, a Welshman who was no great lord, but a squire in her household. Whether they married secretly or simply cohabitated has actually never been fully proven to anyone's satisfaction. But what is certain is that she bore him at least 5 children. The liaison shocked contemporaries, a queen consort lowering herself to take up with a servant was almost unthinkable. The scandal might have ruined her entirely, but it had unexpected consequences. 2 of her sons with Owen, Edmund and Jasper Tudor, were raised as half-brothers to Henry VI, and they were given titles and lands. And when Edmund married Margaret Beaufort, their child became Henry VII. In other words, without Katherine's decision to follow her heart and disregard convention, there would have been no Tudor dynasty at all. Now let's talk about Katherine Willoughby and Richard Bertie. That's another one. Fast forward a century and another Katherine was making waves. Katherine Willoughby was the Duchess of Suffolk. She had already shocked people once by marrying Charles Brandon, although how much say she had over that is debatable because she was his ward. Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, had been one of Henry VIII's closest companions, and he was nearly 30 years older than Katherine. She was just 14 when they married, and she became a duchess overnight. But it was her second marriage that caused the real scandal. After Brandon died in 1545, Katherine was a wealthy and independent widow. She was also one of the staunchest Protestant reformers of her age. She corresponded with figures like Hugh Latimer, and she supported religious change. Somewhere in the late 1540s, she fell in love not with another duke or lord, but with her gentleman usher, Richard Bertie. Now, it should be noted that after Charles Brandon died, Katherine Willoughby was not lacking in suitors. She also actually received a proposal from the King of Poland, which I think is interesting. Bertie was from the gentry, far beneath her in rank. Although he did go to Corpus Christi College in Oxford, he was very well educated and he was a landowner. For a duchess to marry gentry was shocking enough, but this wasn't any kind of hasty elopement. By all accounts, it was a genuine love match, and they became a remarkable partnership. The marriage infuriated the traditionalistic court, but Catherine didn't really care. They married around 1553, and this is when Mary I was coming to the throne. So their union was tested during that period. They were both outspoken Protestants, and they faced real danger. In 1555, they fled into exile on the continent, and their adventures abroad became the stuff of legend, with both husband and wife working to keep their family safe while maintaining their faith. When they returned to England after Elizabeth's accession, they remembered not as a duchess and her gentleman usher, but as a formidable Protestant couple who had endured exile together. It was actually really scandalous at the time, but unlike many matches that ended in disgrace, this one became almost a model of devotion and partnership. Next up, Katherine Parr and Thomas Seymour. Katherine Parr is remembered most often as Henry's sixth wife, the one who survived. But the reality of her personal life after Henry's death shows us that even a queen dowager could court scandal when she followed her own desires. When Henry died in January 1547, Catherine was only 34 years old. She was wealthy, and she was suddenly free after 4 turbulent, dangerous years of marriage to an aging and paranoid king. Almost immediately, she rekindled her relationship with Thomas Seymour, the dashing and ambitious younger brother of Jane Seymour and Edward Seymour, who was by that point the Lord Protector. And Seymour had apparently been interested in each other before she married Henry, and now they seized their chance. The timing was perfect. The problem was that Catherine didn't exactly wait a respectable enough length of time. The two married in secret only a few months after Henry died, before the ink was even dry on the king's will. For a former queen consort, this was seen as indecent and reckless. Thomas Seymour, like I said, was the brother of the Duke of Somerset and the protector of England for the boy king Edward VI. Family rivalries and power struggles made Catherine's marriage not just scandalous, but also a little bit dangerous. But Catherine was still determined. She set up her household with Seymour, and they even took in Princess Elizabeth for a time, which, worked really badly, because that experiment ended in whispered scandal when Seymour's overly familiar behavior with the teenage princess, and I'm using that term like kind of as a euphemism. Anyway, it wasn't great, and it raised eyebrows. Catherine was pregnant for the first time in her life. She withdrew to the country where she gave birth to a daughter, Mary, in 1548. Of course, Catherine died only days later, leaving Seymour to pursue his reckless ambitions that cost him his head within the year. For contemporaries, Katherine Parr's remarriage looked like poor judgment, a learned queen throwing away her dignity for a very dangerous man. For us, though, it shows her desire to live on her own terms after years of being a political pawn, even if it ended in tragedy. Now, what about Cecily of York and Thomas Kyme? Another woman who bucked royal convention was Cecily of York, the third daughter of Edward IV, sister of Elizabeth of York, who became Henry VII's queen. So during the reign of her uncle, Richard III, she was married to Ralph Scrope of Marsham, a member of a respectable northern gentry family who had supported Richard. It was a political move designed to tie the York princess to Richard's circle of loyal supporters. But when Henry VII took the throne after Bosworth in 1485, he had her marriage annulled. For Henry, it was unacceptable that the sister of his new queen, Elizabeth of York, should be tied to a minor northern family loyal to Richard III. Also, Cecily might have asked for it to be annulled because who knows how much she actually wanted this marriage. And so maybe Elizabeth pulled some strings to get the marriage annulled for her. And then Henry arranged another marriage to his own ally, John Wells, Viscount Wells, who was the king's half-uncle. This union bound Cecily securely to the Tudor regime. She lived respectably as Lady Wells until his death in 1499. But then Cecily did something that no one expected. Instead of remarrying another nobleman, she secretly wed Thomas Kyme, a Lincolnshire squire. Again, a royal princess, sister of a queen, aunt to the Tudor heirs, chose a partner that was a squire, and this was an affront to the strict hierarchy of the court, of course. Henry VII was livid. He confiscated much of Cecily's property and banished her from court. For the rest of her life, she lived in relative obscurity, stripped of all of her former influence. The match didn't advance her family, it didn't serve politics, and it certainly did not please the king. It was a love match, or at least a personal choice, and that alone made it scandalous. So Cecily's story reminds us that even in the heart of the Tudor dynasty, women sometimes chose personal happiness over dynastic duty, but the cost could be permanent exile from power. Now for some honorable mentions. Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon. Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary Tudor, who had married the French king, Louis XII. He died famously after only a few months of marriage. She was still a teenager, Mary was a widow, and the most eligible woman in Europe. Henry expected to use her for yet another alliance, but instead she secretly married Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, Henry's closest friend. The king was furious. Technically, Brandon could have been executed for marrying into the royal family without permission, but Henry relented after a hefty fine, and the couple went on to have a long and fruitful marriage. Scandalous, yes, and Charles Brandon, I did a video on him a couple of weeks ago on just how much of a cad he was. But in the end, Henry couldn't quite bring himself to execute his best friend. Then there was Elizabeth I's cousin, Lady Mary Grey. She had the blood of the Tudors and Plantagenets in her vein. She was the youngest of the sisters, Jane, Catherine, and Mary. Although she was small and described unkindly by contemporaries as deformed, she was still a potential dynastic pawn. Instead of letting Elizabeth arrange her future, though, she married Thomas Keyes, the sergeant porter of the royal household. He was a commoner, responsible for guarding palace gates. Hardly a match for a Tudor cousin. Elizabeth was enraged, threw them both into the tower, and separated the couple for life. Their marriage showed more courage than political sense, but it has gone down as one of the most romantic scandals of the Tudor court. Her sister also had a scandalous marriage. I did a video about them a couple of weeks ago as well. I'll link to it up here. Finally, Margaret Tudor and Henry Stuart. Margaret Tudor, sister of Henry VIII, widow of James IV of Scotland, was supposed to be a dignified dowager queen, steering her son's minority. Instead, she married twice, and her third marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Methven, caused uproar in Scottish politics. The match weakened her position, angered her allies, but Margaret never seemed willing to accept the passive role expected of her. Her choice showed just how disruptive it could be when a royal widow followed her heart rather than political necessity. Maybe I should do a full video on that as well. Would you like that? Leave a comment and let me know. So, across these stories, one theme repeats itself. Women in the Tudor world who married scandalously almost always paid a price. Queens and princesses were supposed to be dynastic chess pieces, and when they chose their own partners, the crown saw it as a threat. Katherine of Valois' choice created the Tudor dynasty itself, but Cecily of York's cost her a place at court. Katherine Willoughby found happiness with Richard Bertie, but Katherine Parr's marriage to Thomas Seymour ended in tragedy. Mary Tudor got away with marrying for love, while Mary Grey lost her freedom. What ties them together is not just scandal, but defiance. Each of these women knew what was expected of her and chose differently. Whether or not they were following their hearts, their convictions, or simply their own stubborn streaks, they made decisions that shocked their contemporaries and left us with some of the most compelling love stories and cautionary tales of Tudor England. So there we go, some of the most scandalous marriages of Tudor England. Which ones did I miss? Which ones would you like included? Leave me a comment and maybe I will do a follow-up on this. If you want to keep watching content on Tudor scandals, here's a video you might like on some of the biggest Tudor scandals, or here's a video that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. Remember, my friend, you are deeply loved. I am so glad I share the planet with you. You make the planet a better place. And I'm glad we got to spend this time talking about scandalous women together.